In the year 1939, the world experienced its second massive global conflict of its time. Although Keith Pennington was only 5 to 10 years old during the war, it had a great impact on him and his family. Although many events occurred during the war, two events affected Keith's life the most. These two occurrences were the German bombings and the effects of the war on his brothers. Keith and his family lived in England, in a small town near Coventry called West Bromwich, which was constantly being bombed by the Germans. As a child, Keith had mixed emotions about the bombings in his town. He explained that they were frightening, but at the same time they were a great adventure.
There was a factory across the road from my parents where they bring the down fighters and bombers, and us kids, we would just go over and be in the bombers going da 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 da.
During July and August of 1940, Coventry was heavily bombed by Germany, which resulted in the loss of many lives. Though the bombing seemed exciting and thrilling for the children, for the adults, it was terrifying.
During those 2 months, the constant action in the air lit up the skies and brought the war close to the civilians within West Bromwich. One of the weapons commonly seen in the sky were tracer bullets. These weapons were bullets that incorporated a little pyrotechnics, producing a light when the bullet is shot. Another war device seen in the sky were barrage balloons. These devices were floating above cities and other areas that needed protection from enemy aircrafts. The barrage balloons prevented aircrafts from flying low. This allowed three main advantages to be present. Firstly, the enemy aircrafts were forced to fly at a higher altitude, which decreased bombing accuracy. Secondly, they increased ground defense. And finally, it created hazards for enemy pilots. Keith saw many tracer bullets throughout the years of war, but he still remembers the day he saw a big explosion in the sky. He believes the detonation was caused by a German bomber hitting one of the barrage balloons, which he referred to as floating elephants.
Even though the enemies were in the sky, several military defense mechanisms were put in place in order to protect the lives of the citizens on the ground. One mechanism used for protection in West Bromwich was an anti-aircraft they labeled Big Bertha. The use for an anti-aircraft was to shoot down planes from the sky to prevent further bombings. Although these protection mechanisms were put in place, damage was still destroying the lives of many.
Another protective mechanism was air raid shelters, which were made out of cement or were built into the ground. The construction of these shelters in West Bromwich began towards the middle of the war.
Again, what would happen when there was a big raid, all the kids would get to the places where we shouldn't be, which is the doorway, so you could see things going on. You know, you could see the fighter planes trying to shoot down the bombers, and things like that. That is different. It changed your life some.
Even after the bombings had subsided, citizens were still in danger of booby-trap bombs, resembling everyday items like bottles and children's toys. The combination of bombs originating from the air as well as the traps on the ground took many lives.
In the United Kingdom, 62,000 civilians died over the course of the war. In addition, 326,000 military members lost their lives. This totals to 388,000 deaths, one of which was the brother of Keith. 2 out of 4 of Keith's brothers fought in the war. Don was involved in many historical events during the war, one of which included Operation Torch. Operation Torch was the first invasion the Americans took part in. On November 8, 1942, the American and British troops landed in Algeria and French Morocco. During this operation, the French government switched from helping the Nazis to helping the Allies. This helped the Allies gain control in North Africa.
And things like that. So he was exempt for war, but 2 of my brothers went to war. One was in actually the army before the war actually broke out, and he was the one that landed in Morocco with the joint operations between America and the Brits. The first invasion, the Americans took part in so-called Operation Torch, and he went all the way through the desert of Africa, you know, Morocco and then Libya and all that. He landed in Sicily, fought all the way through Sicily, and he then landed at Salerno. He was one of three people in his regiment that actually lived through the landing at Salerno. And he was put into another regiment, and then the war ended in May of 1945, and he had been all the way through the war, but he got killed in January the 3rd of 1945.
Keith's second brother worked in a reconnaissance car, which is an armored vehicle sent into dangerous enemy fields to collect vital information, such as the enemy's location.
Now the other brother, he went into the army later. He was in the engineers, he was in a reconnaissance car, and he was the radio op with the, sending things back with Morse code. And his armored car got hit by a Panzer tank, shot and hit them. He had his fingers blown off, these fingers, and he came back. He landed in June 12th, which I think is about 6 days after the first landings in France. It was June 12th, and he was back, shipped out of France, injured on August the 13th.
Keith's brother first landed in France on June 12th, which was 6 days after D-Day, which occurred on June 6, 1944. Western Allies entered Normandy from the coast, where many Allied forces entered German areas. These forces included warships, aircrafts, and 6 divisions of attack transports carrying landing crafts. At the end of the day, the Allies took hold of France. Keith remembers D-Day vividly.
Now, when they landed, I never forget the Allies landing in June the 6th, because we were in the Midlands of England, and I don't know, it must have been formidable down in the south of England, because we heard all of this noise in the morning of June the 6th. And we came out and we looked up the sky, and to this day I've never seen so many planes. Oh, planes up high, there were gliders, there were planes pulling gliders. And we just came out at like 5 o'clock in the morning, looked up, 6 o'clock in the morning, looked up and said, they're invading France. And then at 10 o'clock in the morning or thereabouts, Eisenhower came on the radio and said the Allies had started the landing early in the morning of that day. But to this day, I've never seen so many planes.
When Keith's brother came back from the war, he displayed signs of PTSD. However, this mental illness had not been given a formal name at that time. Still, there were soldiers that suffered from its effects. In England, when a soldier returned from war injured, they were required to wear a full blue uniform while they were in public. During a trip back to the hospital, Keith's brother had a PTSD episode.
He'd been riding back to the hospital in a bus, and he was in the the 2 double-decker buses. He was in the upper deck of the bus, and he said all of a sudden he saw a tank. Right. He said, and all he remembered after that, he was under the seat of the thing, because he was still thinking tanks. I mean, he got hit by it. His armored car got hit by a tank, and he was under the seat trying to hide. But the people on the bus, knew that he was a soldier who'd been injured, so they didn't laugh or joke. They helped him.
Due to the long-lasting effects the war had on the citizens, hatred was still present towards Germans after the war. Keith had a teacher who was very skilled in his teaching abilities. However, he was disliked and disrespected because he was a German.
In the class I was in high school, there were kids who jump up and do in front of them, right there. Yeah? Just be very mean in retrospect. You wish you hadn't been involved in it. I mean, I wouldn't do that, but we just didn't give him a good time.
Keith recognizes that the hatred that was caused by the war was not solely produced because of the actions committed by countries, but also by the politics surrounding the war.
Pathé News, and you see these newsreels of things that happened, you know, and you'd see, like in Russia, you'd see pictures of people hanging from lampposts and stuff like that, right? It's not a nice thing. Yeah, it makes you do a little bit more than just dislike. It makes you hate